Welcome to Diabetes Health Matters. This is a webinar series sponsored by Eli Lilly and Company, although they have no input into the content of the webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about African Caribbean foods, and we're going to answer all those many questions that we've had from previous episodes. We're joined by Jasmine Carbon, who's a UK registered dietitian and founder of Carbon Nutrition. Carbon Nutrition, interesting name, and we'll hear more about carbs later on. So Jasmine has a real passion for delivering evidence-based nutritional advice, and the fact that it is going to be personalized to that person's cultural heritage and their dietary preferences. So very relevant to us, so that we can hear more about traditional foods, how to make them healthier, and Jasmine's going to give us lots and lots of tips. So do stay active in the chat. Although we've had loads of questions before, we're going to try and answer those. We need more questions because we have more questions, and Jasmine and I will do our best to answer all of those. So stay active in the chat. We'll have our Q&A as well as answering all of the questions as we go along. So Jasmine's going to tell us about glycemic index, which you may or may not know about. She'll tell us about things like glycemic load and how to make our traditional foods healthier. I'd just like to point out that Jasmine and Dr. Shola Oladipo from Food for Purpose led a really great learn and taste session at the Diabetes UK Forum in 2024. So if you'd like to find out more about this event, visit www.diabetesafrica.org/UK forum. My name's Dr. Joan St John, and now I'm going to hand over to Jasmine to give us lots of answers to those lots of questions that we've gathered for this episode. Okay, so welcome, Jasmine. It's wonderful to have you here. You're going to share some more information with us about African and Caribbean foods and diabetes. I want to take a step back before we do that, Jasmine, though. Can you give us a little bit more detail about your journey, your professional journey? And I noticed that you're part or the founder of Carbon Nutrition. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and how Carbon Nutrition came about?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I'm a dietitian, registered dietitian by background. That's my profession. And to get that profession, I am registered with the Healthcare Professions Council. I did 4 years of university doing clinical placements within hospitals and in community settings. And that's kind of how my dietetic career started. And then just kind of, with the rise of social media, then opened up a social media account and, followed a few food blogs, a few food enthusiasts, and noticed a lot of two things really. A lot of kind of one-sided information being sent out. By one-sided, I mean kind of healthy food being pictured consistently around Western diets, and kind of that being seen as the goal and the pinnacle of healthy eating, which I would strongly disagree with. And then also seeing kind of within not just diabetes, but I guess other conditions, and when it comes to managing the condition, I used to be a renal dietitian before going into community, and you'd see a lot of food examples around, again, kind of Western foods, and not enough examples around foods which are cultural to the person, particularly whether it's African, Caribbean foods, and also a lack of South Asian foods as well when it comes to giving healthy eating advice, whether it's healthy eating for diabetes management, healthy eating post stroke, after a stroke, healthy eating in terms of kind of encouraging healthy kidney function. So I wanted to advocate and kind of push information around food examples focused around African and Caribbean foods. So And then, kind of set up the social media page, Carb Nutrition, and then was kind of getting asked for some one-to-one advice and then some talks and presentations, and then decided to make it into a business, and that's it.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Jasmine. Jasmine, I know that you're going to give us some fantastic tips today and some fantastic information. I would really just ask you, for the benefit of those who may not be healthcare professionals, can you tell us in a few sentences the different food groups? I know we're going to dwell on one of those, which is mainly carbohydrates. But within carbohydrates, can you tell us about something called glycemic index, which some people may not know or understand, and also then glycemic load?
Perfect. So when it comes to the food groups, there are, so we've got our starchy carbohydrates, we've got our protein, we've got dairy and sources of calcium, fruits and vegetables, and then our oils and kind of like sweet treats. And for the benefit of this talk, we're going to be focusing primarily on carbohydrates, but also touching on proteins, because that can really help with the glycemic load of meals, which I'll give an explanation on. And then also speaking about fruits and vegetables as well as its own food group. So when it comes to carbohydrates, it can be split into those starchy carbohydrates, so things like provisions, or gram provisions, things like potatoes, yam, cassava, dashin, taro, sweet potato, and then we've got things, so also the swallows would come under that starchy carbohydrate kind of category as well. And then we've got our fruits, or like natural sugars, in the form of fruits, honey, nectar, agave. Those will all be sources of carbohydrates as well. And then we also have things like things with added sugar, so confectionaries, sweets, pastries, sweet pastries, donuts, puff. Those sorts of things would come under carbohydrates, but then the ones with added sugar. And then when we take kind of glycemic index, so that's essentially a number given to foods to kind of measure its response measure our body's response to that food when we compare it if we'd had just pure sugar or pure glucose. So if a food has a higher glycemic index, that means that that food is absorbed or broken down very quickly, and the glucose can be absorbed very quickly into the bloodstream. If a food has a low glycemic index, it's the opposite. It's a slow breakdown, it's digested slowly, it slowly raises blood sugar. So the types of foods which are going to have the lower glycemic index are going to be foods which have got a bit more fibre in it. So they tend to be less processed. And they might also be be in combination with kind of fats or proteins. And this is where we can start to think about glycemic load. So glycemic load is our body's response to food in relation to the glycemic index of the food, the GI, but also kind of what else you have with that meal. So have you also taken, or is that meal or food also in combination with fats or protein? So we can take an example of something like watermelon, or fruits in general, which tend to be have a high GI because it's broken down really quickly, but then it will have a low glycemic load because there's nothing else kind of within that food to help kind of slow down the process of it being broken down and absorbed into the body. So now we're able to look at ways that diabetes can be managed through diet. So there are a number of ways. I've highlighted 4 ways it can be done. And this can be to reduce the portion of carbohydrates, choosing higher fibre, less refined carbohydrates. So these would be categorised as low GI, low glycemic index foods, choosing healthy fats, and then also adapting cooking methods so you can have less carbohydrates and less unhealthy fats in your meals. So we're going to look at the first one, reducing your portion of carbohydrates. So just to kind of give it additional context, when we're thinking of portions, for the main food groups, we're looking to have at least 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, 3 to 4 portions of carbohydrates a day, 2 to 3 sources of protein, 2 to 3 sources of foods which contain calcium, and then small amounts of fat. When it comes to diabetes management, I think a good way to help manage the amount of carbohydrates, because fruits are a source of carbohydrates, is to aim for 2 fruits maximum, and then unlimited amounts of vegetables in your diet.
So one of the things you're saying is that it's helpful if you want to keep your blood glucose levels lower, is to have more of the vegetables as your carbohydrate source than to have too much fruit as your carbohydrate source.
Absolutely, yes. And then I'll also want to highlight, when it comes to your starchy carbohydrates, as you can see in this image, kind of combining it with a source of protein is another way of enabling you to have that starchy carbohydrate, let's say rice, for example. But then if you were to have meat or beans in there as well, it seems like the portion is, kind of the same as if there wasn't that protein source. But because you've got the meat or the beans in there, you're actually decreasing the glycemic index of that meal, because there's less carbohydrate in that now, and you've got a little bit of protein if there's meat or fish in it, and if you've also used pulses, you've got a little bit of fibre in there as well. So it's to say that you can still have things like rice in your diet, but it's how you have that or how you incorporate that into a meal.
So, I mean, that, from what you just said there, Jasmine, has helped, I think, 2 of the people who have asked questions prior to our event, wanting to see, on the one hand, what can we do about the tendency we have to have a carbohydrate-rich diet when we come from Africa or come from the Caribbean. And the other thing is about how you can make your rice healthier. So the things that you can do to maintain rice in your diet, because that is one of our staples, but how can you make it healthier? So you've said adding some sort of protein, so like rice and peas, for example, as opposed to plain rice, because you're having less of the rice and you're adding in a protein source which will help with your glycemic index, so the way that glucose is absorbed by your body and the rate at which it's absorbed by your body. And also it looks like it's fuller on your plate, if I can say that to a dietitian, because that's important to us as well. But that's one of the ways. Portion sizes presumably is another way. And sort of mixing it up, having different things from the different food groups also is one of the things, yeah? So to those 2 people, that was something that was really important for them to find out. How can we make rice healthier? Not have to give it up. And also, how can we tackle our tendency to have a lot of carbohydrate in our traditional diet, but keep our traditional diet, but keep it healthier? So thanks for that.
So a few more examples of carbohydrates which we can find in traditional African and Afro-Caribbean diets. So we've got an example of boiled, but it could be fried or it could be baked, green banana. This is boiled yam here, macaroni cheese and macaroni pie. Examples of various different rice dishes: plain boiled rice, jollof rice, wache, rice and peas. Breadfruit is fried here, but it could be boiled. Plantain is fried here, but it could be boiled as well. I've included flour here because this is often used as a thickener in stews, soups and curries. So people may not realise, but what could just be a pure meat and vegetable curry or dish, by adding now flour into it, you've added a little bit of carbohydrates into that. Some people might add a potato into that curry dish or soup. So when you're thinking about plating, you've got a meat dish which has carbohydrate, and then in it could be potatoes or any other ground food, and then you might have added flour to thicken it, and then you're serving it with potentially rice. So you can really see how the carbohydrate in that food can add up quite a bit. And then we've got boiled plantain here as well as an example of another carbohydrate which we might have.
And are you going to show us some healthy options?
I will be.
As delicious.
what will constitute a portion then? So we said in the few slides back that we should be aiming for about 3 to 4 portions of carbohydrate source foods a day. So when we think of what a portion is, it would be one open palm, size, of whether it's kind of any of these examples, or one large serving spoon or like a ladle spoon. So kind of keep that in your mind when it comes to kind of like building that plate, and also maybe picture what your plate looks like, because I know on occasion it could be, at a party, at a function, I have everything. All of these are on my plate and it's probably a palm of each. I know, admittedly. So, and that's, can be fine on occasion, but if this is how your plate is always looking, is thinking about, okay, what can we take out? And then what can we then kind of fill that gap with as well?
Also, I think it's important that people remember it's like your individual palm size, which is quite a useful measure, isn't it? So, don't look at somebody who may have a bigger palm than you and think that that's going to be your palm size as well. And the other thing is not to stack it.
Exactly, yeah. And I like to use a palm size as a example, or as a guide of kind of dishing out your own portion, because you'll always have your hand with you, So I guess you could weigh, and you could kind of, get a rough idea of how many grams or ounces, a portion is. But then if you're at someone else's house, if you're at a function, and then you're now in a position where you're serving yourself, or you're not too sure, kind of how much you should have, but you've got your hand there as a guide. So, roughly, as long as on that plate, the carbohydrates are taking about an open palm size, then that's a good portion for you.
Can I also ask you, Jasmine, because rice is, as we said earlier, is a staple, yeah. So in terms of rice, we've talked about adding things like rice and peas, lentils to it, protein to it, to make it a lower glycemic index. In addition, another thing that people often ask is, what about brown rice? What about white rice? What about different forms of rice? How can we make those healthier? I suppose building on the previous question, how can we make our rice healthier?
Yeah, no, exactly. And interestingly, whether it's kind of white rice, brown rice, wild rice, the amount of carbohydrate is actually pretty much the same, very negligible differences. The difference is the amount of fibre within that rice type. So when we move from white rice to like brown rice and wild rice, you've got more fibre, so you've actually lowered the glycemic index of that food, and by doing that, you've slowed down how quickly your body is going to break down that carbohydrate into glucose, and then how quickly your body is then going to absorb it into the bloodstream. And when that process is a bit slower, your body has a bit more time to adjust and to get, comfortable with a higher sugar kind of blood and sugar environment. So you're not going to get that massive peak and then drop in blood sugars. And if you were to have it in its more, refined form, being white rice. However, if you were to, say, kind of have cooked white rice, let it cool down, put it in the fridge, and then have it the next day, is actually built up a little bit of fibre in the called resistant starch. So your body will respond a bit better to rice the next day than it does when it's cooked fresh. That doesn't mean we can still have loads of it. It's just to say that there's a bit more fibre in 1 day, 2 day old rice than there is in, freshly cooked rice.
Interesting. I think that would be a tip that maybe people haven't realised before. And the other thing that you were saying about lowering the glycemic index, it also helps you to feel fuller, I think, for a bit longer. So you're tending to eat less overall because you're feeling fuller for longer because it's got that lower glycemic index. And while we're on glycemic index and rice, we seem to be concentrating only on rice. What about chewing? What does chewing do to glycemic index? Because I've seen people, and I'm sure you have, Jasmine, they can finish a full plate of food in a few minutes. Yeah. So what does chewing do? Does chewing help in terms of glycemic index?
Absolutely, definitely. So if we think the point of digestion doesn't start once our food hits the stomach, it starts at the point of chewing. We've got these enzymes within our saliva that starts to break down carbohydrates into those smaller particles. So if we can think that all the breaking down of food processes is already starting in the mouth, then it's kind of more reason for us to kind of give our stomach a bit of a helping hand in breaking down those carbohydrates. So taking your time with your meal, chewing it thoroughly before kind of swallowing that food does have an impact. If we're taking our time with how quickly we're eating, we're not essentially loading our bodies all of a sudden with a lot of carbohydrates all at once. It's being spaced out over 20 minutes, half an hour. And that gives our bodies, again, that time to respond to that change in kind of blood sugar that is happening within our bodies. So definitely kind of aiding the digestion process by taking our time and chewing food, and by just taking our time with the meal in itself is also really important.
I'm going to throw something else at you. Sorry about this, Jasmine. So, we were saying about adding red peas, beans, kidney beans to rice and peas, and that's slowing the glycemic index of rice. What about if we add beans, lentils, pulses to other foods? Does it have the same sort of effect?
To other food, like meat dishes, or?
I suppose more carbohydrate dishes, really. Does it lower the glycemic index of those?
Absolutely, yes, it would do. It's because you've got that the fibre and the protein from the beans and the lentils. That's what I was mentioned earlier. It's about the combination of foods that you're having within that meal, not so much the rice in its kind of lone state. If you are having, whether it's swallows or plantains with a side of beans and lentils, you've already reduced the glycemic load of that meal, because you've added some fibre and some protein, which means that your body's going to respond a lot more gently to the carbohydrates in that meal. So in essence, we're trying to say, or I think one of the take-home messages would be to avoid having kind of plates of majority carbohydrate, and try to, where we can, avoid having plates of just pure carbohydrates, in essence as well. So kind of large plates of jollof rice. Please have some chicken on the side. Please have some vegetables, some stew. That in itself will help reduce the glycemic index of the rice, will help improve the glycemic load of that meal. So essentially, I'm saying you to have a full proper meal as opposed to just rice by itself, which I hope is an easy ask. I'm asking you to have a more complete meal.
Okay, thank you so much. I should let you carry on. So you've got a fist here as opposed to an open palm, and can you tell us about that?
So this is an example here. So when it comes to portioning out, rice, pasta, oats before it's cooked. So, we're not always going to be able to kind of serve from cooked food. So when it comes to, knowing roughly how much to cook for you and your family, if you're a family of 4, 5 fistfuls should make just enough. I mean, I don't think anyone definitely not my household, makes just enough. There's always enough for leftovers. But if you wanted to avoid leftovers, then having one fistful per person should create enough foods. Things like rice, pasta, and oats, just kind of dried foods. And then when it comes to our swallows, our pounded yams, amala, eba, fufu, even like rice fufu, so just really cooked down rice that's kind of formed into a similar ball shape, and sadsa made from cornmeal. All these foods, which are essentially dried, grated ground provisions, which are served alongside soups and stews, we should be aiming for a tight fist would be a portion. So just kind of, whereas the other image I wanted you to have like a full fistful of rice or pasta, but in this instance it'll just be from like the end of the fingers to the thumb. That would be the portion you'd want to see on your plate or in your bowl. The reason for that is that these foods, in comparison to like the food in their whole form, is somewhat, you could say, partially like broken down. Your body doesn't have to do much to break it down into glucose. It's already done. It's very soft, very easy to break down in the stomach and then enter the bloodstream. And it could enter the bloodstream, well, it will enter this bloodstream much more quickly than if you were to have yam or cassava or even rice kind of cooked as itself.
So, Jasmine, I mean, you've given us some fantastic ideas already, how we make rice healthier, how we lower glycemic index. So you're going to give us some take-home, not takeaway, maybe I should say takeaway tips, some healthy takeaway tips. So here's Jasmine's healthy takeaway tips. What would you suggest first, Jasmine?
So I would suggest where we can possibly swap from white rice, white pastas, white breads to more granary, wholemeal, seeded options that would increase the fibre of that carbohydrate, and then that would reduce the glycemic index of that food. So your body's going to respond better to the carbohydrate within that meal. I would also recommend when it comes to things like swallows, pounded yams, ebbas, if we can swap over to the whole food form, that's going to have more fibre, arguably less carbohydrate, because you'll be able to have a smaller portion of that. So your body's going to respond a lot better. Your blood sugar is going to respond a lot better to that. When it comes to things like plantain, green banana, where the greener, the less ripe it is, the more fibre it will have. And that means it's going to take longer for your body to break it down, to digest it. You're going to feel fuller for longer. Your blood sugar isn't going to go as high as quickly as it would do if you went for the riper, yellower, sweeter end of the plantain scale. So the more greener side, we would say. I mentioned this earlier, but having rice the next day, it's got a little bit more resistant starch in it, a little bit more fibre, so your blood sugar won't go as high as quickly as if it was kind of like freshly cooked rice. This gets asked, but swapping from white sugar to brown sugar will not make a difference, even though, going from white pasta to brown pasta does. It's still got the same carbohydrate, the same glucose. So don't think that swap will make a difference to blood sugar. And then when it comes to things like fruit juices, whether it's fresh, whether it's in a smoothie, whether it's organic, doesn't matter. It's still concentrated amounts of sugar, which can be quite a lot of sugar to have all at once. So try to have more whole fruits instead, because you're going to have the fibre in that. You're less likely to have 10 oranges, because that's effectively what you're having when you have a glass of orange juice. Do have more whole fruits and less processed kind of fruit juices and fruit drinks.
I think one of the things that's coming out really strongly for me there is fibre is your friend. And don't lose the fibre if you can. So going for the whole fruit, going for, the ground provision as opposed to the swallow, when you can, is going to give you that fibre, and fibre is your friend. Can I ask you a question here, Jasmine, because it's a question that often comes up about two things. One maybe more than the other, coconut oil for one, and palm oil for another. As to which category are we going to put them in? Are we going to put them in the healthier fats, or are we going to put them in the less healthy fats?
They would, go in the unhealthy fats. For the reason that coconut oil, although kind of coming from a plant-based source, would still constitute as an unhealthier type of fat in that it's saturated. And by saturated fat, I mean that it's a type of fat which can increase our risk of things like poor heart health, higher blood pressure. So we would want to try and minimise our intake of things like coconut oil for that reason. And then palm oil as well, we would consider it's got more of the saturated fats than it does the unsaturated fats. So it's trying to moderate how much we use of that. There's also the environmental impact of using palm oil, so it's just to be considerate of that use as well.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for clearing that up, because so what you're saying is about moderation, and it's about reducing the intake. Not that you can never have it, but trying to reduce or moderate the intake.
Yeah, and that goes for all oils really. There are healthier ones and unhealthier ones, but they are all fats at the end of the day. So, and we should really be trying to kind of keep our intake of fats to kind of modest amounts. Yeah. And then other kind of diet and lifestyle things which are going to impact on disease management, the amount of alcohol that we take. We also, I think we forget that some alcohol or like the mixes that people have with alcohol are a form of sugar, and can obviously impact blood sugar readings. Being physically active doesn't necessarily mean going to the gym, but going to the gym is can be a way of being active and having exercise. But just simply walking, being on your feet, doing weight bearing exercises like taking the stairs, carrying shopping bags, those sorts of things are important ways for us to not only kind of keep fit and healthy, but we're actually using some of that sugar that's in our bloodstream. So being active. Stress can also impact on diabetes management. So if you are kind of feeling you are going through kind of stress, speak to a healthcare professional, speak to friends and family, see what you can do to help manage that stress, because stress can lead to poor food choices. We might be reaching for more snacks, more confectionaries, and we want to try and avoid that as much as possible. And then things like smoking and vaping as well. Although I'm not too sure on the evidence around vaping, but we do know smoking, does have a negative impact on overall health and will do so as well when it comes to diabetes management. So when it comes to cooking methods, trying to buy lean meats where possible and removing visible fat. Avoid using sugar to brown meats. Trust me, you don't need the sugar. Just high heat, dry pan, the meat will go brown. We don't need the sugar to do that. Be mindful of the amount of carbohydrates that you're adding to soups, stews or curries, because again, that's another source of carbohydrate you're adding there. Do you need to add potatoes? Could you use corn flour instead, for example, to thicken a soup or stew or gravy? And when it comes to, sometimes it's really hard to remove all visible fat within a meal or within a dish. So letting it cool down, and then you let the fat rise to the top, and then you can kind of skim all that off. Ensures that meal's got a little bit less fat, and then overall healthier for you to have. And then also to be mindful of the amount of oil you're using in sauces, soups, stews and curries. I think we can be quite generous when it comes to frying up onions and garlic in heaps of oil. It doesn't need it. Just be a bit more mindful of the amount that we're using.
I'm going to put you on the spot there, Jasmine. So in terms of thickening sauces, gravies, you're saying that corn flour is going to be healthier than using white flour?
It will be another option. Yeah. So it's going to have less, still a form of carbohydrate, but much more less than you would get from using something like flour in thickening soups and stews. So yeah, corn flour would be a good alternative.
Thanks. I mean, that's a useful, easy thing that people can do as well, isn't it? In terms of the treatments, we know that there are many different treatments, but I know that this is going to come up in the questions that have already been asked and that are going to be asked. So we're going to talk about, in general, things like the treatments, things like how you can do portion size awareness, more about adapting your cooking methods and how you can get that friendly fibre into your diet. Jasmine, that's been amazing. Thank you so much. It's been really helpful and a lot of useful tips that people can take away and start to make those small steps that you said earlier on are the key thing here. I mean, it's very difficult to make and sustain huge changes in what you eat or how you live. But a small step, you can sustain that. So thanks very much, Jasmine.
Thank you.